Welcome to Season 12 of Crown Gridiron Nation, presented by Pointsbet. We are Canada's only college football show. The only one. And these guys are pretty unique as well. Gord Randall's in Vancouver, Mike Hogan's in Toronto, and I'm Jim here on Football Island with the first 2-minute offense of 2022. Drama to open week one of the Backyard Brawl, West Virginia and Pitt. Peterborough's Jared Wayne picking up where he left off from 2021. He led Pitt with 3 receptions for 89 yards. The pick 6 by DJ Devonshire sealed it for the Panthers. Nick Mardner a little closer to home after his transfer to Cincinnati. Here is his first impression from 35 yards out, a trip to the promised land. But the loss to number 19 Arkansas will knock Cincinnati out of the top 25. Need your Rourke fix? Well, here is younger brother Curtis at the controls, a quarterback for Ohio. Following in Nathan's footsteps, a great opening day. 364 yards passing and 4 TDs in a 41-38 win over Florida Atlantic. None of the 6 Canadians on Bethune-Cookman ticked off a stat, but Akeem Messidor sure did in his first game for Miami. The D lineman tallied 4 tackles, a sack, and a pass defended in a Canes blowout. Penn State Purdue, the Nittany Lions Canadian contingent, were fairly quiet, with the exception of 5th-year senior Jonathan Sutherland. 3 tackles and a sack for the safety from Ottawa. Quebec's Jeffrey Kenton Arcou moved from Syracuse to Memphis to produce. And that's exactly what he did in his Tiger debut. 5 stops for the junior linebacker, but it was in a losing cause. UConn, always a hub of players from north of the 49th. Montreal sophomore receiver Kevin Sklarcius with a pair of receptions. Edmonton tight end Russell Dixon with his first catch in an uncharacteristic Husky romp. Coming off a Week 0 win over Wyoming, where London's Chase Brown ran for 151. Chase doubled down with 199 on the ground for the Illini against Indiana. His twin brother Sidney, not to be outdone. 8 tackles and a TFL in a razor-thin loss to the Hoosiers. Old faces and new places, and I'm not just talking about the 3 of us yokels. I'm talking about Canadians who jumped through the NCAA transfer window. Gord, who can make an immediate impact in a new area code?
Well, in the new landscape of college football, that list of transfers is a long, long list. It's hard to keep track of, but one of the names that really stands out to me, a guy that we have seen make an impact at his previous stop, is Akeem Messidor. And he moves from West Virginia down to Miami, and a team in Miami that has a lot of helium behind them. They appear to be a program on the rise. Mario Cristobal comes in, and there's a lot of momentum behind that team. And I think Messidor fits into a nice situation. He's starting right away for them, has already recorded a sack in their opening game, and he looks to be a guy. He's shown some real juice getting after the passer in his couple of years at West Virginia. And if he can take the next step this year, he's a guy that could be facing some real NFL prospects on a team that I think is probably going to be a top 25 team this year.
Last year, when we were looking for somebody as a runner-up to John Metchie III for the Cornish, one of the names that came up a lot was Nick Mardner. Nick has changed schools as well. He's gone from Hawaii to Cincinnati, which is something a tourist might want to do, but from a football perspective, it probably works for the big receiver. He leaves a school that has seen some dysfunction, shall we say, in the football program and moves to a top 25 school. Now, here's a guy who, when you think of somebody 6'6", you think of, oh, he's a red zone target and not much else. Wrong with Mardner. He's a deep threat. He averaged 20 yards per reception last year, which was top 10 in the NCAA. And while he only had 1 catch in his debut for the Bearcats, it was a 35-yard touchdown. So the more that he gets acclimatized with the Bearcats offense and a new starting quarterback in that program, I think he's going to become more and more a factor as we get closer to bowl time.
Yeah, and I would say a similar story to Mardner, although a guy that hasn't had the resume at this level that Nick Mardner has is Joe, who has moved from Clemson down to South Florida. Now, this is, relatively speaking, maybe a bit of a step down in terms of the caliber of program for him, but despite his impressive athletic measurables, Ajo is a guy that kind of got buried at Clemson the last couple years and hasn't really had much of a chance to show his stuff. When we've seen him on the field in limited snaps, he's shown flashes of exceptional athleticism, and I think moving to a new conference in the AAC that is a bit less of a meat grinder than what Clemson Allison plays against might benefit him. He had a fairly quiet start, just 2 receptions in his first game, but I think as he finds his footing, that athleticism we talked about should be able to allow the cream to rise to the top, so to speak, in this new situation.
I'll go defense with Jeffrey Canton-Arcou, who is a really hard-hitting linebacker from Quebec City. He had been at Syracuse for the first part of his career, and he's found himself now going down to Memphis to play for the Tigers. He's a big man at linebacker, 240 pounds, he's 6'3", and he hits hard. He had 10 starts in his career with the Orange, and he's already found his way into the starting lineup in Memphis. In his opener against Mississippi State, he had 5 tackles. He's a guy who's going to be around the football, he's going to cause some fumbles, and he brings a great deal of physicality to that Memphis defense.
We've had week 0, we've had week 1, and they all add up to the top Canadian performances in our stateside 5. In at 5, Sidney Brown, the senior defensive back in Illinois. He's Chase Brown's twin brother. He led the Illini defense with 8 tackles and a TFL. Akeem Mesidor, the transfer from West Virginia, racked up 4 tackles, a sack, and a pass defense in less than a half in Miami's 70-13 blowout of Bethune-Cookman. Peterborough wideout Jared Wayne led Pitt in receiving with 3 snags for 89 yards in a heart-stopping win over West Virginia. In at 2, it's Curtis Rourke, Nathan's not-so-little brother, put up 41 points, went 21 of 42 for 364 yards, and 4 TDs in a solid opener for Ohio over Florida Atlantic. And at number 1, it is Chase Brown, 199 yards rushing in a 3-point loss against Indiana. He has 350 yards in 2 games, and he leads the nation very early in the season in that category. Coming up, it's the week that was in USPORTS. The quest for the Vanier Cup has started, and we'll tell you about Chapter 1 in our 3-minute warning. Saskatchewan-Calgary, the Dinos open on a kickoff single, and that was as good as it would get for the guys in red, because one play later, Mason Nyhouse finds Daniel Perry in full stride. 75 yards, turns in the 6. Nyhouse went 26 of 35 for 408 and 5, count them 5 with all your fingers, touchdowns. He found 9 receivers on the day, 6,800 go home unhappy in Cowtown. Regina, Manitoba. People forget that the Rams were so close in nearly all of their 2021 games. They found new ways to collapse. Not this day. Led by Bennett Stusyk's 5 receptions for 132 and a TD, and Anthony Bennett's 3 sacks. The Herd gets horned at home. Thunderbirds and Golden Bears. Alberta led 21-14 after 3 at UBC, but then the C-Dub Rookie of the Year from 21 took over. Garrett Rooker, first a 98-yard hookup with Shamar McBean. That ties it up. And then with 2 minutes left, Rooker waltzes in to cap it off for UBC. Yes, you can go home again if your name is Steve Samara, back as head coach at St. Mary's. He was there 12 years ago. Back again between the lines, though, it was Adre Simmons who led the way for the Huskies with 117 on the ground. Bishops, Mount Allison, and Mount A staged a furious comeback at home. First, a Brant Berzik run ties it at 15 with 2 minutes left, and then it's left to Graham Mather with this 35-yarder that seals it, and they are going crazy baby bonzo in Sackville. The Stingers were the cardiac kids last year. It's kind of the opposite so far. Stingers were up 19-0 on the road in Sherby at the half, but then the B&O rallied. Louis Tardif with 3 fourth-quarter field goals, including a 26er with 4 seconds left, and they are sure happy in Sherby. Western and Laurier, and the Golden Hawks kept it close until the Mustangs took control in the second half. Evan Hillock led the way at quarterback, 15 of 20 for 249 and 4 touchdowns for Western, with Keon Edwards, his reliable best, churning out 127 on only 14 carries. That's a 9.1 average. Queens over Ottawa by 10. Gales Tyler Mullen, gotta like that kid's name. He was 4 of 4 on field goals. Anthony Souls, 96 yards rushing and a TD. Richard Burton with 6 receptions for 93 yards for the tricolor. Maybe the surprise of the week in Ontario, Carleton and Toronto, because it was the Blues who exploded for 27 second-half points. Kingsale Phillip threw for 213, had another 66 yards rushing, and Toronto's Adam Williams cranked out 149 on the ground on 19 carries. Perfect first question to Mike. Mr. Hogan, who is your favorite for the Vanier Cup, and who is your dark horse?
Well, let's go to the favorite, and I think it's the favorite from anybody who watches this level of football, and it's going to be the Western Mustangs, and for obvious reasons. They are stacked. They just do what Western does every year. They recruit well, and they've always got that progression where they get big enough leads where they can take a running back or a receiver or somebody on the defensive side and get them out for some reps and get the next guy in. So one player basically grooms his replacement. They are so good. There is not a weakness on the team this year. I think they are the dominant beast in Ontario by a comfortable margin. And right now, I think they go up against any team in the country and they win, maybe not easily, but I think they would be the prohibitive favorite if the Vanier Cup was played today between Western and anybody else.
Yeah, for me, Western is definitely one of the teams that comes first to mind when we're talking about this conversation. But I'll look at, and I know I'm not going way off the board, but the team that lost to them in the national final last year is the Saskatchewan Huskies. Now, they lose Adam Mackert, who is the engine behind a lot of their offensive success over the last couple of years, but very quietly, kind of overshadowed by his teammate. Mason Nyhus took a huge step last year and comes back as a fifth-year guy with a lot of experience and a talented and deep roster around him. Head coach Scott Flory has proven to be one of the best recruiters in the country. He himself is an offensive lineman, so they have that signature deep and stacked offensive line group there. And as they showed in the opening week, they look like they're flying right at the top of the Canada West. Another team I'm keeping a close eye on this year that I think might be ready to take the next step is the Montreal Carabins. They always have to duel it out with the Laval Rouge et Or in the Quebec Conference, but the Rouge et Or don't quite have the star power that they have at a lot of seasons this year, in my opinion at least. But in Montreal, they do, and that's led by Jonathan Senecal, the quarterback who transfers back from the States to go back to school in his home province. And I think that he might be able to let them take the next step coming out of that Quebec Conference and potentially challenge Western for the title.
And in terms of dark horses, I mean, if you take the power conference teams and the power teams within those conferences, you have to go outside those schools. And a team that used to be there a long time that may have an outside shout would be Queens, one of Mr. Randall's alma mater. They've got a really balanced attack. You know, they've got Keenan at quarterback, James Keenan, who is a pretty good passer. They've got a legitimate deep threat in Richard Burton. They've got multiple running backs, and they've got an outstanding offensive line. So they're going to score some points. The defense has some outstanding players on it. They may be a little bit behind the offense at this stage of the game, but if they can continue to improve, well, I still think they're significantly behind Western. We're talking dark horses here, so if I'm going to look at one, I'll look at Steve Snyder's Gales.
The Philpott twins graduated, the Ford twins graduated. So who is ready to be a marquee name in USports in 2022? Is there anyone with star power out there, Gord?
Well, when you're talking star power in the USports ranks right now, I think the first name that comes to mind has to be Keon Edwards, the running back at Western, and a lengthy and successful career as a runner at that school, at a school that pumps out running backs like it's nothing. And as we've seen already this season, it continues to be the engine that drives that offense and keeps the pressure off of Evan Hillick, their quarterback. But that is the signature part of the Western attack, is that run game. It's always well schemed. It always has good athletes, and Edwards has thrived in that system for multiple years. He, to me, is far and away the star of USports football right now.
Yeah, I would have voted for him, Gord, for the Crichton last year. I think the trade Ford nod was more of a career acknowledgement than it was for the year he had last year, which you could say was maybe the third best in his career. But Edwards was phenomenal last year, I agree. One guy who's off to a bit of a slow start this year, though, that still should have some star power would be Olivier Waugh, the quarterback with Concordia, who last year had a phenomenal year, over 300 yards passing per game, and led the country with 18 touchdown passes. But he's off to a slow start this year, just over 200 yards per game and only 3 touchdowns in 2 games. The thing that I think think kind of gives him that added oomph around the country is when there's a big name player from Laval or Montreal, you expect it in that conference. And people outside the conference always want to see that other player step up. So when somebody with Raw's ability and has the kind of season he had a year ago, I think that might get him some of the nods from some of the writers around the conferences that don't include Laval and Montreal.
Just around the bend, we will handicap the field for the Cornish Trophy. Welcome back. Here are your CJFL standings on the road to the Canadian Bowl. Time to check in on the Pointsbet Cornish Trophy, and Chapter 1 is the watch list. 18 players in every position except special teams. And as we go through this list, you'll see a fair number of transfers in that mix as well. We mentioned some of them off the top of the show. Last year was John Mechie III in Alabama, who captured his second Cornish Trophy. Mechie was the preseason favorite going in. He never gave up that lead position. Given that Chase Brown is already over 300 rushing yards, is this national award his to lose, or are there bona fide contenders who can and will emerge, Gord?
Well, I do think he has a pretty clear pole position at this point, and my main reasoning for that is his usage. The Fighting Illini have played 2 games already. They played a week 0 and a week 1, and in those first 2 games, Chase Brown has had over 50 combined touches of the football between running, receiving, and even passing. He had a passing attempt in their last game against Indiana. So this is a guy that the offense really is revolving around for the Illini. Now, I would caution people not to expect that this is going to look anything like what Chuba Hubbard did a few years ago as a running back to run away with the award. I don't think that Chase Brown's going to be a guy that's going to have a bunch of those highlight pack runs. But what he is going to do is he is going to continue to pound away. He's going to get 25, 30 carries a lot of weekends, and he's going to rack up a lot of counting stats for that. I think one of the things that he will need to do is put the ball in the end zone a little bit more than he has already. I think he's only scored once in those 2 games, but I still think that he's got a pretty strong lead at this point, though not insurmountable by any means.
And you know, when you're leading the country after 2 weeks with 350 yards rushing through 2 games, you're doing all right out of the gate. My only concern about him is consistency. And last year we saw him put up some monster games. He had 2 200-plus yard games, including that memorable one against Penn State. But sandwiched between the 2 200-yard games was one against Wisconsin where he had 35 yards. He had 4 of those games last year where he was under 50. And to go to Gord's point, most of it was usage, where he had single-digit carries over the course of the game. If he gets his carries this year and his bad games are in the 60 to 70 range as opposed to the 20 to 30 range, there's no reason in my mind where he just can't run away with this thing this year. He's that good, and they're giving him the opportunity to be that good.
Does a defensive player ever stand a chance in these things? 2 years ago, Calgary native and OK State linebacker Eamon Ogbong-Bamiga got the most first-place votes, but he lost to Mechie. What will it take for a defensive player to eclipse a 1,000-yard rusher and all-conference QB, guys?
It would take a lot. There's one guy that I love, and Chase Brown knows him better than anybody, and it's his twin brother, Sidney, who has been just fantastic over the last couple of years. The thing that really holds him back, though, isn't his talent, his ability, or anything else. It's his position. Because you know what voters like? They like big, bright, flashy stats. And when you're playing safety, you're not going to get a lot, especially when you're mostly in run support like he is. But he's not going to put up a lot of numbers. Last year he had 80-some tackles. He's been off to a quick start. He had 8 against Wyoming earlier this year already. So he's a guy that's around the football a lot, unless he starts finding it through the air or they use him in packages where he can come in and maybe get a sack or 2. I don't think he's going to put up the numbers to do that, but in terms of ability, he might be the best defensive player in the country.
Yeah, I mean, Mike alluded to it, but there are 2 defensive statistics that are sexy to voters, and those are sacks and interceptions. And with Sidney Brown, he's going to have to record some pretty key interceptions to have his name in that conversation. And I mean, I'm not the average voter in that. I was one of the people that gave Eamon Ogbongbemiga a first place vote a couple of years ago because I thought he was better at his position than Mechie was that season. But the reality is that offense sells, and it's because of those sexy counting stats, those scoring plays. So on that note, I think one defender who does have a chance, and I talked about this guy already on the show, but that's Akeem Messidor. And the reason for that is his ability to pile up sacks. He not only can potentially do that, but he also is now on a team that people will have a lot of eyeballs on. And that helps him too, because the reality at Illinois, for example, is that they may play themselves out of many people caring about them by about 6 weeks into the season, depending on how things go. Whereas the Miami Hurricanes is a buzzy program. They're, like I said earlier, likely to be top 25, which means a lot of eyeballs on them. And if Messidor can rack up those sexy counting stats on sacks, then he's a guy that could potentially vault his way into this conversation as well.
Games of the week coming up in just a minute. Welcome back to KGN. Time to look ahead to the top games of the True North Influence. And Gord, you get to dunk this one.
Yeah, I am going to dunk this one because we've got prominent Canadians on both sides as Ohio goes into Happy Valley to take on the Penn State Nittany Lions. And at Penn State, it seems like he's been there forever, but Jonathan Sutherland is still there on the Penn State roster, and he is still starting and making an impact for them in the secondary. The fifth-year defensive back from Ottawa continues to be a key member and a character guy, and he'll be looking to shut down on the other side Rourke. Wait, hang on. No, Curtis Rourke, who had a breakout performance last weekend, going over 400 yards passing, putting up 5 touchdowns in a win against Florida Atlantic. Now, the challenge for him is, well, Penn State's not Florida Atlantic. So will that type of performance translate against a much stiffer defense, especially at Penn State, which not only is Big Ten, but known for its defensive front? It'll be interesting to see if Rourke can continue to get time to make the plays that he needs to make and show us those shades of his brother that can maybe give us our Rourke fix while the elder Rourke is out of commission.
I'll go with Illinois and Virginia, and we're going to be talking a lot about Illinois this year, mainly because of 2 individuals that we've talked at length about already, but we want to focus on this game while it's still worth focusing on from an Illinois perspective. This is a team that dropped a tough one last week against Indiana. It's a team that probably thought it might be able to flirt with the top 25. That did not help. So this is a pretty big game for them if they have decent bowl aspirations, or even to flirt with the top 25. This becomes almost imperative. For Virginia, they won their first game easily. They're trying to use this as another notch on their belt to try and get a little bit closer to the top 25 as well. So it's not quite as sexy as Gord would say about the game that he had, but it's still worth watching, especially from a Cornish perspective.
For Gord, Mike, everyone on our team, Pointsbet and Crown Produce, this is Jim Mullen saying, let's get out to the game.